Chapter 8 of The Beautiful Mrs. Davenant by Violet Tweedale. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8, Local Gossip. "What a dream place," said Hilda Davenant to herself, when for the first time she gazed upon the lake house. Hilda was an excellent walker, and she loved exercise. The fact had helped materially to preserve her youth and beauty. Clad in short tweed skirt, sports coat, and low-heeled, stoutly-soled boots, she had just covered 3 miles, and felt no fatigue or reluctance to cover another 3 on the return journey. "Yes, what a dream place," she repeated softly and meditatively, as, leaning on her stick, she surveyed her lonely and beautiful surroundings. She had gradually come to know exactly where the lake house was situated, and had mapped out its geography for herself. She concluded that by following certain lanes and paths across the fields she could come within sight of the place, and avoid all high roads and established approaches. Quietly, and without mentioning the fact to anyone, she had learned how to reach the spot she longed to look upon. It was early on a brilliant October afternoon that she had carried out her plan, and now she felt rewarded. Across bare stubbles, across dry ditches still blind with luxuriant foliage, through narrow overhung lanes and wide green pasturages, she had reached her destination. And not once had she needed to inquire her way, which was lucky. She had met only one very infirm old labourer, and numerous cattle and grazing horses that had lifted their heads and stared in astonishment at so unusual an apparition. Hilda found herself on the opposite side of the lake to that on which the house was situated. She stood amidst very rough ground, grass-grown and starred with large, brilliant scarlet fungi. Sparse and ancient firs rose at intervals, and numerous dead giants of the forest lay prone where the wind had laid them. Immediately in front of her the land shelved abruptly down toward the lake. Here and there were narrow tracks made by poachers, sheep, and rabbits, amongst the confused wilderness of great boulders, enormous plumes of ferns, and a network of branches. The lake lay like a sheet of dull silver, not a breath moving its surface, long purple shadows of trees and cloud motionless upon its bosom. On the other side of the water from where she stood lay the remains of a summer-house. Once it had pretended to be a Greek temple, now it was nothing but a confused heap of rotting timber. It stood on higher ground above the lake, and its back was turned to a dense wood which lay between the lake and the lake house. From the elevation upon which Mrs. Davenant stood, and the angle at which she chanced to catch it, she could see the house around which so much mystery had gathered. The sun fell full upon the long-beamed frontage of what Claude Carlton had spoken of as one of the finest examples of black-and-white architecture in England. Sunshine bathed the great smokeless chimney-stacks and latticed windows in a blaze of shimmering gold, yet over all there seemed to hang an atmosphere of profoundest melancholy. It lay there so silent, so bereft of all those cheerful, stirring sounds of life attendant on a great property. At Great Glentworth on such a golden afternoon the guns would be popping in the stubbles or at the cover-side. Foresters would be busy with the axe, the saw, and the pruning knife. There would be the jingle of harness from that old sloth, the plough, as she crept across the chocolate-coloured furrows. There would be the lowing of the Jersey herd at the approach of milking time, and the neighing of one horse to another across the pastures. The whistle of Claude Carlton to his dogs as they investigated the rabbit-holes in the hedges and ditches, and the voices of men and women working in orchard and garden. Here were no signs of human life, though wild life was present in abundance. A pair of herons fished knee-deep at the edge of the water, and the white scuds of rabbits flashed everywhere. Above, motionless on outstretched pinions, a hawk was poised, and a raven sailed by on indolent wing, pursued by a flock of foolhardy little birds whose pugnacity was stronger than their sense of preservation. Mrs. Davenant gazed long and earnestly on the scene, and her face was very sad and tragic. It brought back to her certain incidents in her life that she never cared to dwell upon. They were closed for ever, but the memory remained, and it hurt. She had so often in days gone by pictured the lake house to herself. Now, actually face to face with the reality, it seemed to bring back with startling clarity incidents she fain would have forgotten. She shook herself clear of her dreams at last and peered in front of her. "Yes, I think I might venture. There doesn't seem to be a living soul about," she said out loud to herself, and then she began to make the rough, steep descent to the edge of the lake. In another 10 minutes she stood on flat ground, rather breathless and untidy from the stern opposition nature had shown towards her intentions, but comfortably triumphant at having carried out her object. She walked slowly round the bend of the lake till she reached the summer house, into which she penetrated, and sat down on the crazy seat to rest and think a while. One could dream here in the warm, hushed silence. One could make love here, secure from observation. Was this where Harry and Letty came to pour out their mutual adoration? Was this where the ghost walked? And who was the ghost, she wondered. It was surprising how uncommunicative Letty was on the subject. Mrs. Davenant could and did appreciate the fact that Miss Thorne was the future mistress of the lake house, and naturally would not desire to add to the evil reputation of her home. But she thought that Letty might have confided to her some little thrills, some little grey mystery. The truth was that though Mrs. Davenant was so keen on hearing all about the ghost, she did not really believe in its existence, and she had unconsciously adopted Harry Thorpe's explanation that the old man had himself set afloat the rumours to defend himself against all intruders and frighten all and sundry from his doors. Why he should desire this utter solitude was doubtless explained by insanity. Claude Carlton always spoke of him as insane, and such seemed to be the general opinion. Now the utter peace of her surroundings began to sink into the very heart of her being, and she was conscious of a sense of contentment hitherto unknown. She told herself that she was really happy at Little Glentworth, happier than she had ever been. Country life seemed to suit her, and she adored lovely scenery and wild life. The placid, dignified existence of the landed gentry had always appealed to her in the pre-war days, when she paid country visits. There was such an atmosphere of freedom from worry and care, and again such homes were being reconstructed upon their original lines. There were once more the numerous well-trained domestics under the tyranny of efficient housekeepers, and the same staffs of soft-footed men-servants who had returned slightly damaged and grateful for peace. To be waited upon hand and foot, and only have to interview the head gamekeeper and the land agent who drew the rents, was an ideal arrangement. The wonderful unpunctuality of such lives was attractive. None now dreamed of getting up early, unless sport demanded an effort. Breakfast hung about till all hours, and the groaning luncheon-boards humbly awaited the pleasure of the trenchermen to lighten their weight. On those big estates food was no real difficulty. Fish in the river, cattle and sheep on the pastures, game and rabbits in the covers, grain, vegetables, roots and fruit, home-grown in abundance. A dairy with a safe supply of butter, milk and cream. Doubtless there had been a certain respect for the food controller's orders, but there had never been any real dearth. That sense of freedom from the law and the prevailing economic conditions appealed strongly to Hilda's independent soul. The life at Little Glentworth appealed to her also. She enjoyed having no engagements to keep save an occasional luncheon or tea. She was free to dispose of her days as she pleased. She had become bored with London through sheer fatigue. Before the war she had racketed persistently and pertinaciously because everyone else racketed, and she wished to keep step with the world. London liked her, and with ample funds, a knowledge of the ropes, and but few prejudices, she had kept pace with the rapidest. Then war broke. Business as usual was construed into pleasure as usual. The licence of the times at first appalled her, then amused her, and more often it repulsed her. She saw all moral sense scattered to the four winds of heaven, all classes abandoning themselves to unbridled freedom of moral action. She looked on, secretly wondering, while a stupendous avalanche overtook her sex and altered their entire future. Her set had but one object, to forget the horrors of war, and to assist the men on leave to forget their misery. The last 2 years had brought about great changes. Automobiles were slung up in private garages, and there were no taxis. Her set went to work. Hilda Davenant did her bit in a hospital war depot all day, and walked to her evening entertainments. She dined and danced and supped at night, bringing with her, as all the smart world did, a couple of bottles of champagne from her own cellar. There was a distinct taste of novelty about life during those times of stress. For 5 years there had always been the background of war, a hideous excitement from which there had been no escape. From the moment the armistice was signed, life for Hilda Davenant had fallen down crash to a horribly sordid level. Strikes and the threat of revolution did not cause her any fear. She knew too little about them to be afraid, and England was very war-weary, so people said. Her set was by no means weary. It was spinning round harder than ever again, and spending more than ever before upon what some silly politicians called unproductive labour. Automobiles were unslung as the chauffeurs were demobilised, and one could not as yet get taxis because they didn't trouble to come out by day, preferring to earn a fiver at night for waiting outside the ballrooms. To Mrs. Davenant, London had become unbearable, and she hurried out of it. She found herself in a world which hardly seemed to have changed at all. Of course there were a few empty chairs, but many had been filled again. There had been a quick change of husbands during the war. So many women had had 3, if not 4. Looking back on the past, Hilda Davenant knew herself to be tired in mind and body, while she had thought she was merely bored. Racketing no longer appealed to her, and the knowledge of what so many of her sex had done in brilliant actual war service threw her objectless life into dark and contemptible contrast. She was a very intelligent woman who had known what it was to earn her daily bread. In these days her thoughts had been concentrated on finding someone to lift this anxious burden from off her shoulders. She was not sure now that her happiest days had not been passed in that early struggle. Social successes no longer attracted her, and in the daily absence of Agnes Howard, who had entered into hospital drudgery, she found herself becoming a prey to discontent, dissatisfaction, and a sad disposition to remember all the less happy incidents in her varied career. She thought that what would please her most would be a plunge into the waters of oblivion for a while, and this desire had driven her into the country. She had thought to find oblivion there, but had she found it? This was the question she now asked herself. Latterly there had awakened in her the long repressed and frustrated necessities of a woman's life, which many did without, but which were none the less conditional to natural happiness. The call of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the ambition for power of woman's beauty over the senses of men. There were hours when she seemed to be the battleground of the passions, and the reckless curiosity of the whole human race. As a married woman she could classify her own emotions and understand her own nature as no single woman could. In resisting such onslaughts she felt as if she was wantonly flinging aside allurements and joys of quite inconceivable delight. Formerly she had been satisfied with getting through each day with a modicum of happiness, a minimum of boredom, yet insensibly she had grown to look for something wider and deeper than that. What was she here for, anyway? Where was she aiming for? What was her object in life? There seemed to be no answer to these questions. She had become aware of a great void, with no solution offering itself as to how it might be filled. As physical languor wore off in the new peace and healthier life, other thoughts obtruded, and looming large was the oppression of a future empty of natural interest. Meanwhile she was simply drifting, but the void was there. Her temperament was warm and impulsive, and capable of great and lasting devotion, and she knew that her powers of loving were being ruthlessly wasted. She had always been in love with love, but the outflow of her nature was checked at its source by some inexorable destiny. The shadows were lengthening, and the sun was nearing the brow of the cliff. Another minute or two and it would dip behind, and the lake would be plunged in gloom. Mrs. Davenant roused herself from out her meditations and prepared to stroll homewards. From where she sat she could discern a tiny pathway winding round the face of the cliff, and by which she could regain her former route, with the long stretches of pasture and ragged hedges lying between her and the village of Great Glentworth. "I shall come here often again," she told herself, looking back upon the scene she had just left. "There's something strangely attractive to me in its silent ruination. It's so like my own life." She walked slowly, pondering over those problems with which her mind had been filled all afternoon, and it was with something of a start that she looked up in answer to a cheery salutation. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Davenant. Been for a walk? What a glorious day!" The vicar of Great Glentworth stood before her, having just emerged from a gate leading into another meadow. "Good afternoon," she echoed. "Where have you sprung from so suddenly?"
"I've been to see a sick friend, and took the short cut across the fields home. I always leave the dusty high road whenever I possibly can, especially on a day like this."
"It's glorious. It fills me full of thoughts and visions. I've not thought so much for a very long time as I have to-day," she declared with one of her flashing smiles.
"And they've been happy thoughts upon the whole?"
he questioned, his serious eyes meeting hers for a moment as they moved on side by side. "They were rather disturbing, thank you," she returned demurely. "One doesn't think much in London. There's no time, and I've had rather an accumulation to get through."
"Ah, that's where the country scores. It is so easy to read and think. It's a poor arid sort of existence that never thinks."
Hilda nodded her head in assent. "There are times," she said in rather grave, measured tones, "when it is wiser not to think. Coming here has been something of a turning point in my existence. I've pretty well exhausted life, and it's taken its toll of me. Though I am not really very old, I've crammed enough experience into it to fill 10 lives. And now I've struck off into quite a new track. I've left all the fun and frolic and the reckless sort of comradeship one forms, and I've come down to this sleepy hollow to gain fresh experiences of a wholly different kind." For a moment she looked full at him, and he at her. There was a hardly repressed excitement in her bearing and aspect, and he was conscious of responding. The monotony of his parish work, the pettiness of the lives he lived amongst, fell away, becoming for the moment as if they were not. There was nothing of the sentimentalist about Ambrose Warburton, and the sudden appeal she made to him was hardly sensuous, still less sensual. Nevertheless, an almost passionate desire of earthly beauty seized upon him. Of the beauty of things seen, the beauty of the human form, of things he had read of but never beholden. Beauty of unknown distant lands, of arid deserts and snow-peaked mountains, of ancient cities with cool courts where fountains played, and above all, the beauty of youth and the illimitable horizon of youth's hope. What was there in his companion that had flooded him over with such vision? He struggled against it as against a rising tide. Her voice recalled him. "Some day I want you to tell me things, Mr. Warburton. There are so many, many things I want to know."
"Oh, that we all want to know. "There are so very few answers to our questions," he replied gently. "I can assure you I am always being humbled by the knowledge of my own ignorance." She looked at him intently, questioningly, hesitated a moment, and then spoke again. "I think you'd find my questions very simple and ordinary. I know nothing about your religion, any religion. I probably wouldn't care about it even if I did understand it. But I'd like to know anything there is to be learned. I dare say it's only idle curiosity." He looked at her from beneath his drooping eyelids. There was much speculation in his glance, but his voice was untinged by any sort of emotion. "There really isn't very much to learn, Mrs. Davenant. My faith is so little a matter of words, and so much a matter of deeds, that it is impossible to deal with it in a mere casual conversation. If you want words, I can sum it up in one: love. Please don't expect too much of me. I'll do what I can when you're ready, but my whole life is one long regret for my poverty of achievement. And that poverty is, I suppose, all the more apparent to me, because twice to-day I've been in the presence of those about to say farewell to this bewildering and astonishingly beautiful world. It often comes home to me how little I know, how little I've seen, and how little I've profited by my very limited experiences." Mrs. Davenant was conscious of a chill. She had felt impelled to say what she had by some mental conflict within her, which she had not yet classified. The vicar had discouraged rather than encouraged her. "It is understood that what I say to you is in strictest confidence," she said rather abruptly. "Oh, naturally so. Have no fear, Mrs. Davenant. I also expect you, and all to whom I speak on serious matters, to treat such conversations as private." There was silence between them for a moment or two, and then she spoke again. "I suppose we really are expected to profit by our experiences, but it's awfully difficult. You see, it's so hard to regret having been happy." "You mean even at the expense of others?" he questioned. "I think that's very human, and after all, what are we but human? I should like to have profited more by my sojourn here, and yet I'm so self-seeking that I'll be glad when my hour strikes. I'm frightfully keen to see the other side of the veil. My curiosity is intense. I've been balked of rich experiences and high endeavour, but I've still got the supreme, the crowning experience, which no one can ever take from me." Hilda laughed. "Well, don't be in such a frantic hurry to gratify your curiosity. You've got to instruct me first, and I'm sure there are many who love you." "Many?" His voice was dubious. "Why should they? I know there are some, thank God. The saddest thought for me would be not to be loved. I hope a few will love me as long as I live," he ended quietly. "But you would put your religion before love?" she asked. "My religion is love, Mrs. Davenant. It stimulates and enjoins love, since only through love can the higher spiritual attributes of our nature be developed. We say, love is God and God is love. But there is a wonderful little prayer of Akempis: 'Heal my heart of all inordinate affection, that I, being healed within and thoroughly purified, may be made fit to love.' I have come to be very shy of taking the word love in vain, for I really know nothing at all about it, except that it is God." "Do you really believe that?" she asked gravely. "Why then does love bring such penalties? There is something wrong somewhere. You know that without legal sanction, love between woman and man is called a sin. No matter how much her mate by suitability and instinct a man may be, the woman may not give him the natural fulfilment of her love without the benediction of church and law. Yet," she uttered a sharp laugh of inutterable scorn, "and yet there are women who ask and receive the blessings of the church on a marriage which is a palpable black lie, a mockery of love, and therefore, according to your beliefs, a mockery of God. Such unions are nothing but legalized prostitution.
The woman who really loves a man demands to be completed in him, else she is not worthy of the name of woman. She demands that no matter how things are in heaven, she shall be bound to her love by the earthly tie of the flesh." Her voice vibrated with strong feeling, and as he watched her closely he saw the delicate colour deepen on her cheeks, but his voice was utterly unemotional as he answered, "And that woman would be right." She threw back her head, and there was a swift challenge in all her attitude. "Surely you would not say that in all cases?" "There is a very simple rule, Mrs. Davenant, that all of us can follow. If our love cannot obtain the benediction of the Church, then, before condemning the Church, let us ask of ourselves this simple question: in giving my love in its entirety, shall I wrong any fellow creature by so doing? If, after really serious consideration, the answer can be honestly given in the negative, then I should certainly say such lives are justified in union. Let us remember, in speaking of the penalties of love, that love means self-sacrifice, and self-sacrifice means shouldering the cross." She flashed her answer back in a gay, swift defiance. "And I say that in the highest regions of human feelings the law, whether of church or state, is utterly out of place." Their eyes met full. He smiled into hers. He did not look in the least shocked. "I take that to be so," he replied simply. They fell to silence, having reached a point where words hinder rather than help thought. They were alone in a meadow filled with peaceful grazing creatures. In the distance rose the square Norman tower of Great Glentworth Church. Suddenly she spoke again. "If you are such a believer in love, why have you never married? Don't answer if you'd rather not. I realise my impertinence." He smiled suddenly as he met her bright, questioning eyes. "I don't mind telling you in the least, more especially as I don't want you to labour under any misapprehension as to my character. I'm awfully human, with a man's normal passions and cravings for woman, home, and children, but during my mother's life I was bound to other human service." "But your mother is dead," she ventured gently. "Yes, she died 7 years ago. She lived to a great age, and left my sister Emily to me. She had come through a great sorrow. Death took her lover. When I found myself free I realised how time had passed. It was almost too late for marriage, and my sister and my wife might not have got on under the same roof. Another, and perhaps the primary reason, Mrs. Davenant. When I was more or less free to contract earthly ties, I found... well, I had grown into the fixed habit of pouring out all my very humble adoration at the feet of the God I seek to serve." "I think you have been sacrificed to your family, Mr. Warburton. Such adoration as you speak of lacks the human touch, and you are very human." She saw a wave of colour sweep over his face. "Oh, indeed, you misunderstand. I am very human, but no one who has not experienced it can know what the love of God can be to a lonely man. A love closer it is than breathing, nearer than hands and feet." Then for a while both were silent again as they neared the village. "You'll come in some time and have a quiet chat with me?" she asked, as they shook hands at the crossroads. "Whenever I can be of service to you. Only let me know and appoint the hour," he answered, and with that they parted. "What can her life have been?" he wondered as he walked on towards home. "She's a type I've never met with before. Knows nothing of any religion and wants to learn. I wonder. Certainly my instinct to be slightly discouraging was a wise one. Any signs of eagerness on my part would have made her swing round in the opposite direction. What's she going to do in Great Glentworth? Make history for us, of that at least I'm certain." "Tea is ready," called a voice through the open window. He entered the vicarage and walked straight into the parlour, where his sister stood before the tea-tray. She might have been his twin in petticoats, a tall, dignified, and even stately figure in the shadowy room, with thick iron-grey hair, dark eyes, and rather large, finely cut features. Great strength of character was the impression the brother and sister conveyed to even the most casual observer. "How is old Miles?" she asked. Warburton sat down at the table and helped himself to bread and butter. "Going fast, but quite happy and contented, as they all are at the very last. Lucky beggar, he'll know all about it before to-morrow morning. I met Mrs. Davenant in Miles's meadow and walked back with her." "Mrs. Davenant? Well?" There was a note of keen questioning in her voice. Emily Warburton was deeply interested in the newcomers. Her brother laughed frankly. "Well, what more? That's all there is to it. I know no more than you do." "She's a profound mystery," said Emily with conviction. "It's not our business to probe it." "Luckily not," retorted his sister rather dryly. "Oh, what a bother! Here comes Mrs. Luckett." A silence fell, only to be broken a minute after when the caller was shown in. "I just ran in for a second to tell you I've some old clothes for you to distribute in the parish," exclaimed Mrs. Luckett, accepting the chair and the tea Warburton set before her. "If you could kindly manage to send for them. Oh, by the way, I've just met the little Glentworth mystery in the village, looking more mysterious than ever." "I take that to mean that Mrs. Davenant was looking, if possible, more beautiful than ever," suggested Warburton with a slow smile. Mrs. Luckett flushed all over her gaunt cheek-bones. "I don't quite catch your meaning," she retorted austerely, and with a slightly offended air. "Do you think if Mrs. Davenant had been a very plain woman, any one would have suspected a mystery in connection with her?" asked Warburton. Mrs. Luckett considered the question seriously. Not finding the answer worthy the occasion, she said, "But I don't consider her so beautiful, and I'm only echoing what everyone else says, that she's a mystery. My Sarah is an old friend of the little Glentworth kitchen maid's mother, and she says there isn't a single photo or anything at all lying about to hint at who or what the late Mr. Davenant was like. You must own that's rather suspicious." "I should be inclined to put that down to extreme sensitiveness, Mrs. Luckett. The lady in question does not desire to have her sacred memories exposed to the prying gaze of the public. Le portrait que l'on ne voit pas est le seul qui compte." Mrs. Luckett eyed the vicar suspiciously, but could detect no trace of sly humour in his grave face and voice. She understood no French and mistrusted those who did. She turned to chaff by way of escape, and shook her scraggy head and forefinger roguishly. "Oh, vicar, I fear you are very much of a man." He was laughing now with genuine amusement. "I sincerely hope so, Mrs. Luckett. But why fear to pay me such a compliment? I'm all for womanly women and manly men." "Well, anyhow," exclaimed the lady by way of winding up that particular subject of conversation, "they say Major Carleton's very much on the spot, and that Mrs. Davenant cares for nothing but men. This place is simply teeming with mysteries. There's the Lake House mystery. What do you make of that now, vicar?" "I've never made anything of it but the not uncommon eccentricities of a lonely old man," smiled Warburton. "Oh, but look how the plot has thickened lately!" exclaimed Mrs. Luckett. "I wasn't aware of it." Mrs. Luckett shrugged her shoulders with irritable impatience and turned her back on him. "Your brother is in one of his Stonewall moods this afternoon," she said to Emily Warburton. "You are of course aware that a young lady has come to live at the Lake House, and report says she is very friendly indeed with the heir, young Mr. Thorpe." Emily smiled delightfully. "I'm so glad to hear that. It must be very lonely and depressing for any young creature to live alone with such a peculiar old man as Mr. Thorpe. I think Harry Thorpe is particularly attractive. He's not only very good-looking, but he's such a good sort." Mrs. Luckett looked down on her plate and crumbled a piece of bread thoughtfully. "It seems a curious position, doesn't it? No chaperone, and those two alone together all day long. Now, in my young days such things weren't done in decent society." Oh, we live and learn, Mrs. Luckett. Where is decent society found? It is surely one of those supposititious conditions of life which no nation has yet achieved. Have you ever found a monopoly of goodness in any one particular sect? Oh, do try some honey. Our bees have done so well this year," urged Emily. And then she adroitly turned the conversation into less contentious lines, much to the vicar's relief. End of chapter 8.